Hi, I'm Callie Hawkins, the CEO and Executive Director of President Lincoln's Cottage. Mary lived here in this house with her husband for 13 months of his presidency. She wrote about how dearly she loved it here and the special place the cottage held for her after the death of her son Willie. And we love her back every day on our tours and in our communications. Mary Lincoln was a brilliant, complex woman who suffered unimaginable loss in her lifetime and has also become one of the most maligned first ladies in American history. We want to use our platform to amplify the voices of female scholars, biographers, and a novelist, each of whom have spent time researching and thinking about Mary to add nuance to the legacy of this fascinating woman.
Hi, I'm Catherine Clinton at the University of Texas in San Antonio. Mary Lincoln is one of the most fascinating, challenging, exasperating, misunderstood women in the 19th century, having spent the past quarter century with this enigmatic First Lady, who I suggest might have been the first to be called First Lady. I'm regularly confronted by an audience member or a student, and most recently, even my husband, and ask, was Mary Lincoln crazy? And I am indignant for her anew. Was she crazy legally or medically? Judged by doctors, lawyers, a hostile, divided nation during the Civil War. If I were to plunk her down on a psychologist's couch today to determine is she crazy, I probably would come to the same conclusion I did when I finished my biography, Mrs. Lincoln Alive. She was crazy for Abraham Lincoln. When she met him, he was a raw-boned, often tongue-tied young lawyer in the parlors of Springfield, Illinois. She connected with him and stayed loyal as he distanced himself from her on that fateful 1st of 1841. But they renewed their pledge, they plighted their troth, marrying a month short of her 33rd birthday. He was a man without prospects, a man with a debt, a man who was scorned by her family as someone who was raised in a cabin with dirt floors, while she had been raised among Kentucky blue bloods and blue stockings. So yes, she was crazy. And she took a gamble on this man whose side she was by on his long journey to the White House. And she remained loyal to his legacy after his tragic death by assassination. She mourned him for another 17 years until her death. And her madness was the great yeast that allowed Abraham Lincoln to rise to greatness. So I salute her.
Hi, I'm Lois Romano, and today I would like to address Mary Todd Lincoln's complicated relationship with money. For most of her life, she was accused of being a reckless spender, but she was also chastised for being stingy. In addition, it took Mary several years to get a pension from Congress as Lincoln's widow, and that's because it was believed that Lincoln had left her a wealthy woman. But according to Mary, she had barely enough money to subsist. So what was the truth? In fact, all of these things are true. It's complicated. Mary, in fact, was an addictive spender. We know that today, this is actually some form of mental illness. She fit all the diagnostics for compulsive shopping disorder. She shopped to fill a void in her life when she was feeling lonely or empty. And that happened predominantly during the White House and after Lincoln died. She racked up an enormous amount of debts, but to her credit, she paid them all. Mary tried to explain to Congress that she was not left a wealthy woman. Lincoln did leave about $2 million in today's money for his family. However, he died intestate, so Mary had to share those funds with her two sons, leaving her an amount of money that was just not enough to buy a house, to furnish a house, to maintain a house, and to live the rest of her years in comfort. The men in Congress believed her to be a wealthy woman, and they resisted her pleas for 2 years. They thought she lived extravagantly, which she did not. They thought she had an enormous amount of money, when in fact she was living in boarding houses. They accused her of using this ploy to take money away from the American people. In the end, Mary got her pension because she was a very strong woman and she persevered. She made her case, and she did have some allies that made her case for her. She got $3,000 a year for the rest of her life and basically was able to live comfortably. We should not judge Mary for her relationship with money, and we should not judge Mary for wanting to live well as a former First Lady after her husband was assassinated in front of her.
A common misconception about Mary Lincoln is that she was incapacitated by her grief. It is true that loss and suffering made a defining mark upon her life. Yet Mary Lincoln's sorrows were part of her humanity, and how she moved forward was evidence of her resilience and her strong spirit. Mary Lincoln endured the deaths of 3 children, was sitting next to her husband when he was fatally shot in the head, and was betrayed by her last surviving son, who locked her up in a mental asylum. Mary Lincoln suffered trauma that would wipe out the best of us. We should admire her, not denigrate her. Because after Eddie died in 1850, she was pregnant with Willie just a few weeks later. 2 months after Willie died in 1862, she sent figs to a friend and her ailing daughter. 2 months after her husband was murdered, she stared down powerful men who wanted to wrest from her a widow's right to determine the location of her husband's memorial. And she fought for release from the asylum, regained her legal and financial independence, and moved to the French Pyrenees to curate a life of her own choosing. In March 1878, Mary Lincoln wrote home from France, "I leave here this afternoon and will be in Naples in 10 days' time, where I join my lady friend." Abraham Lincoln would have been so proud of his beloved wife, out exploring the world and finding joy and a little peace. Mary Lincoln carried grief the likes of which most of us will hopefully never experience. But Mary Lincoln was brave. Mary Lincoln was a survivor.
In doing research to portray Mary Lincoln for my novel, I was struck by the mixed impressions people had in her youth and in her adulthood. A childhood friend described Mary as a vivacious girl, great conversationalist, but a child who was given to periods of depression. One young man called her the very creature of excitement. Her brother-in-law said of Mary, she could make a bishop forget his prayers. Lincoln's law partner, William Herndon, also described her as graceful and cultured, but Mary was witty, and she had a sharp tongue that she seemed to have deployed on William Herndon, because in time he came to call her a she-wolf. And it's Herndon's portrayal, unfortunately, of her that has held significant sway over the years. So who was Mary Lincoln? Well, I think Mary was a bright, fun-loving, spunky, ambitious, complicated young woman who was dealt a hand in life that was staggeringly difficult. She carried a deep wound from having lost her mother when she was 6 years old. And 18 months after her mother's death, her father remarried a woman with whom he had 9 more children. Mary, she didn't get on well with the stepmother, was sent to boarding school. And I think she surely must have felt a great sense of abandonment, first by her own mother and then by her father as well. But in Springfield, she found the love of her life in Abraham Lincoln. And he was an unpolished lawyer whose brilliance she recognized before a lot of other people did. Her marriage, I think, became her sanctuary. Within 9 months of their ceremony, she gave birth to her first son. Abraham Lincoln would go away from home for 6 months out of the year in 2 3-month segments, fall and spring, and ride the 8th Illinois Judicial Circuit. Mary, who was left home alone with children and a lot of chores, felt abandoned. She never wavered in her support of her husband's political ambitions. She continually urged him forward and upward. She was his own campaign partner, writing letters and throwing parties for hundreds of people to gain their support. And when a telegram reached Lincoln informing him of his 1860 presidential victory. He left the party to shout to Mary, "Mary, we are elected." They were a team. Mary's kindnesses to others have been largely overshadowed. When a Springfield neighbor fell ill after childbirth, Mary nursed that newborn as long as she could. She paid for the wedding gown of a servant, and she gave furniture to another servant when she married. During the war years in Washington, D.C., she would visit soldiers who were in hospital, and she would bring them gifts of fruit and books, and she would read to them. She wrote letters for them, very often without saying that she was the wife of the president. While in the White House, she evolved politically also through her friendship with Senator Charles Sumner, an abolitionist, and she became more fervent as an abolitionist as a result. Mary's life was marked by just profound trauma. She lost 3 of her 4 sons to illness: Eddie at age 3, Willie at age 11, and Tad at 18. Mary was holding her husband's hand when he was shot in the head at Ford Theater. She felt deeply betrayed years later when her remaining son Robert had her committed to a mental institution briefly after the death of Tad. And in the final years of her life, she spent them in isolation and mourning in her sister's Springfield home. I think Mary deserves a fonder place in our national memory. Without her encouragement and ambition for her husband, America might never have experienced the leadership of Abraham Lincoln. We might never have known about the humble Illinois man who today is regularly called the greatest president the United States ever had.